Good morning, everyone. My name is Nate McClendon. You may or may not know me. And if you do, you may know me as a music teacher from our school district. That is the former me. I am no longer in that position anymore. So the new me is yet to be determined. That's still, that chapter is still being written. But for today, the me that I am is the person that gets to bring you the message. So we'll move right on into that. I want to say, first of all, I have come to a certain way of kind of looking at the Bible, and I want to share this story with you through that lens. One of the ways I've come to read the Bible is I believe the Bible, all of the stories, all of the parables, the commandments, everything that you read in there is God trying to show us the difference between two kingdoms. We live in a reality where there are two kingdoms. There is the kingdom of heaven, which is God's kingdom, and there's the world, which is man's kingdom. And they are not the same. All the stories in the Bible highlight the difference between those two, as does the book of Ruth. So highlighting those differences, sitting here last week listening to Pastor Kayla, it kind of ruined my week. That's not the funny joke part. I had the sermon kind of like worked out, and then she mentioned this one word called Hesed. And it was the key ingredient that I hadn't found yet that had kept my sermon from like gelling. And so I sat there last week just being amazed by God, saying, wow, thank you for this, because now I can finish my sermon. However, in the process of doing that, this new information, the research that I had to do, I must have rewritten the sermon about 10 different times. So I'm not quite sure which one you're going to get, but you're going to get one of them. So here's the thing about Hesed. Hesed is the key characteristic of God, but also the key ingredient that fuels the kingdom of heaven. So what is Hesed? In English, that's translated to faithful love or tender kindness. And that's good, that's true, but that's not the full definition of that meaning. It's much more narrow and much more intense than just that. Hesed refers to love that is formed within a covenant. It forms within the bonds of a covenant. There is an exchange of affection and loyalty. It's promised, it's owed, it's expected. You could say that this form of God's love is conditional. And we don't like to say that, and we don't like to think that. We like to think of God's love as being unconditional. But here's the good news. His love is both. It is both conditional and unconditional. And that's the mystery of God. You may go through the Bible and find all kinds of things that seem to contradict, but they don't. The issue is that we're just not big enough to see the whole picture of truth. Here's a crazy example, and you may not find this interesting at all, but it made me smile. This is how I see the way the world works. We talk about contradictions. If you were to go outside and just start walking north, and you just kept going north, eventually you'd be going south. Right? That's like the bigness of God. North becomes south. Things that seem contradictory are not. We're just not big enough to see the whole entirety of the earth and that it's round, and you're just going around in a circle. We don't see that. Just like we cannot see the full picture of who God is. So what seems to be a contradiction is just our lack of the ability to comprehend. Sorry, I didn't mean to go that much on a tangent. But that is how I see his love. There are conditions to it, yet it is unconditional. It is conditional in that a response is expected. And it's always been that way in terms of sacrifices and offerings. Go through the Old Testament. You are expected to respond to God. Even to the New Testament, if you love me, how many times does Jesus say that? If you love me, then what? There's always a response that is expected. There's conditions. However, it is unconditional because It's free choice. This is free will. You don't have to do it. And that love still exists whether you respond to it or not. It is unconditional. So it's both at the same time. So here's how Bible scholar Darrell Bach describes Hesed. It is one of the most fundamental characteristics of God, consistent with what we know about his covenant nature. Hesed is wrapping itself up in all the positive attributes of God: love, covenant, faithfulness, mercy, grace, kindness, loyalty. In short, the acts of devotion and loving kindness that go beyond the requirement of duty. That last part I want you to get. Hesed is a love that goes beyond the requirement. It goes beyond the commitment. It goes beyond what's expected. So Hesed, yes, it's covenantal, but it's beyond that too. It's not just what's required of you. It's beyond that. So now getting to the book of Ruth. As a person of color, and being as multicultural as I am, I tend to notice how people are addressed and what they're called. For example, you can have a president or you can have a black president. You can have a quarterback or you can have a black quarterback. I'm sensitive to those kind of things, how we label people. So as I was reading this book of Ruth, and I was reading the NIV, so it's a little bit different than what you heard this morning, but here's what stuck out to me. They kept calling her Ruth the Moabite. I'm like, why you got to keep calling her the Moabite? I know she's from Moab. I read the first chapter. She was from Moab. That's where she lived. She's the Moabite. But in the beginning of the second chapter, it was always Ruth the Moabite, Ruth the Moabite, Ruth the Moabite from Moab. Like, why? I get it. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason that she's constantly addressed as the Moabite. Two reasons. The first one is the fact that she's labeled and is a Moabite. It highlights Hesed, that covenantal love that we're talking about. The fact that she is that is going to highlight this special kind of love. Because she is not one of them, because she is a foreigner, the love that she showed towards Naomi in deciding to stay with Naomi was something that went beyond the covenant, beyond that relation. She was Naomi's daughter-in-law. She no longer had any ties legally to Naomi. The fact that she stayed was something that went beyond the law. That was Hesed. And that's because she was a Moabite. Had she been Israelite, there was a different set of cultural norms that would have been expected. Also, one of the key ingredients of this story on Ruth's part is that she gave up everything she was, who she was. She gave up her land, she gave up her hometown, her family, her ways, and her gods to be with Naomi and to adopt Israel's way. If she were not a Moabite, there wouldn't have been that to give up. That was going beyond. That is now setting up a contract. She got rid of one contract and set herself under another one. It also sets the stage for Boaz, which will come a little bit later. But the other reason it's important to note that she was a Moab or a Moabite is that it highlights the difference between kingdoms. You see, in man's kingdom, in our world, we tend to label, we tend to separate, we tend to segregate. And that's what you see there. That's why it's so important for us to label her. We want to know. That title, Moabite, it's a legal term, and it means foreigner. You are a foreigner. You are not one of us. You are the other. But as you go through the rest of the story, Boaz redeems her, and she is no longer the other. She is brought into the family. That doesn't happen if she's not an other. So it's important that we understand that Ruth is a Moabite, that she is an other. Interesting fact about her being called a Moabite is once Boaz comes into the picture, she's no longer referred to as a Moabite. He does not call her that. The narrator doesn't call her Ruth and the Moabite anymore. It's Ruth, my daughter. That's the first thing that Boaz says to Ruth. All right, so let's talk about Boaz. At the very end of the chapter, we learn from Naomi that Boaz is what's called the guardian redeemer. That's a legal status. See, Boaz was one of the people in his family that he had wealth, he had power, he had status. And as a guardian redeemer, it was his job to bail out his family. When anyone in his family came upon tough times, like Naomi did, the guardian redeemer would come in and bail them out, meaning usually to buy their property, to acquire all of their assets so that those things stay in the family, because that's how the family continues to exist. So there was like a financial obligation there to redeem. And part of that meant you not only redeemed the properties, but you also redeemed the people that were attached to that. And this is in the sense like when the males die, as we have in this situation with Naomi. So that was Boaz's job, was to take back all of the property, to redeem everything. So what happens as Ruth is out gleaning? Boaz comes, he's like, who is this woman? And he learns who she is. Like, oh, that's Naomi. That's Naomi's daughter-in-law, Ruth, the Moabite. And so his initial reaction, he says, Ruth, my daughter, and then he shows her favor. You see, it was not custom to let a foreigner glean your fields. They could allow that, but they didn't have to. Gleaning the fields after the harvesters went through was a custom that was designated to the poor within their culture. Ruth was not from within their culture. But he allowed her to, and he said, you know what, don't bother her. Let her do this. Let her glean what she wants to glean, and don't bother her. And if she's thirsty, let her come get water. So he showed loving kindness, tenderness. But this is not yet hesed, because this was his duty. He was nice. He saw Ruth as part of Naomi, so he was just extending kindness. This is still like kind of within the realm of man's kingdom, to be kind like that. But then something happens that changes everything, and this is perhaps the most important part of this scripture, or of this story. He says this to Ruth when he speaks to her. She actually asks him, why are you being so kind to me? And he says this, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law, Naomi, since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before. So that was Ruth's hesed. So he's responding to the hesed that she had shown. And then he says this, and for me this is pivotal, it changes everything. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. This changes the whole story. He's recognizing something different. He's recognizing something beyond a covenant. He's recognizing something beyond someone that is just in need of help. He acknowledges the hesed that she had showed and responds with his own hesed, meaning going beyond the law. He sees that this contract is not with him, it's not between him and Ruth, it's between Ruth and God. You have come under his wings. He doesn't say you've come under my care, you've come under God's care. So it's no longer just a cultural contract. This is a holy contract. This is a spirit-driven contract. And so here's what Boaz does next. So they part and they continue to go work in the fields. And when that time period of work is done, this is what happens. They gather to eat. And Boaz says to Ruth, come over here and have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. And then he offered her more. He offered her grain and allowed her to eat until she was completely full. And then said, take even more than you need, which she then took back to Naomi. So she ate to her fill. She had everything that she needed. And then he instructed his workers to go through that field and not only leave her undisturbed, but to actually pull grain out and leave it out for her so that they would actually be harvesting for her, making her life and her work so much easier. This was not just permission. This was not just the obligation to take care of someone. This went far beyond that. This is what he extended to Ruth. This was his version of Hesed. Interesting thing, as Boaz said, the blessing was God's to give. May the Lord bless you. Words out of his mouth. But who's the one that physically acted out those blessings? That was Boaz. The blessing was God's to give, and Boaz was the one that carried it out. That is a huge, huge message to get from this story. So this tells us two things. It tells us something about Hesed, and it tells us something about the kingdom. We've seen Hesed working throughout, things that go beyond the contract. Everything that Boaz is doing could be classified as Hesed. But it also highlights how the kingdom works. Hesed is the energy, the fuel of the kingdom. It regenerates, it inspires, and it reproduces. Hesed is the trait, the character that fuels that action. In the kingdom, you see, we have an active role. It's not just one of listening or speaking, it's one of doing. Boaz, as the Redeemer, he foreshadows Christ, the Redeemer. He shows us that Hesed is God's way, that it's God's character. It is part of that covenant between us and God. Now I'm going to go off on another little tangent right here. I called this my rabbit hole ending. We'll see how this goes. I don't know about you, but I often think about the purpose of life. As a Christian, why go through all of this? There is a lot of suffering. There is a lot of dysfunction in life. And if heaven awaits me, if heaven is what I'm promised, why can't I just go now? I mean, seriously, right? Why go through all of this? The story of Ruth and Boaz can give us an answer to that question. And again, it comes down to Hesed. We are in a covenant with God, and that covenant goes like this. God sent his Son to be the sacrifice for us, to take on our sin, so that we can be redeemed, so that we can be saved. Our part of that covenant is that we have trust and we have faith in Jesus Christ. That's Hesed. There's a covenant right there. But Hesed goes beyond. It'd be nice if it could just be that. Okay, I trust, I believe in Jesus. Can I just go to heaven now? It goes beyond the contract. This can be the hard part, but it's also the beautiful part. God says it's not enough for us to just be in that contract. There is more. He chooses to have us be part of his plan. Part of his plan for the world, part of his plan for salvation. He wants his love to work through us. This goes beyond the contract. It's more than just our salvation. Let me give you another scripture that highlights this. And see, this going beyond, what it does is it brings us into a deeper relationship and a deeper understanding of God. So John 15:15 says this, I no longer call you servants. This is Jesus speaking, and this is the result of the covenant. He's saying this as a result of the covenant. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I've learned from my Father, I've made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command. Love each other. He takes us to another contract that's beyond that contract. And again, we see love, chesed, is behind that. What we go through now is not for no reason. We are part of a plan. Like Boaz was the one who distributed God's love, so should each of us, in whatever way we can and will, whatever way we are made to, whatever influence, whatever power, whatever wealth, whatever it is that you have, it's not for you. It's to be used by God. And that's the point of Boaz as the guardian redeemer. We are now friends with God. And as a result of that, our life transcends its own personal value, which honestly, when you think about it, is pretty small. I mean, how many individuals have been here and will continue to be here? We come and go. It's pretty small. But the life that we live can affect others in ways that we may never see and never know. That's part of God's story. So ultimately, the story of Ruth ends with the birth of Obed. I won't tell you the whole story because I don't know if someone else is going to come preach the rest of Ruth. But at the very, very end, I know, spoiler alert. At the very end, Ruth gives birth to a son named Obed. And what's so beautiful about that is Obed is in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And that's how the whole book ends, is with the genealogy of Christ. So Ruth, the Moabite, the foreigner, the other, because of Hesed, is brought into the very bloodline of the Redeemer. The Hesed that she showed reproduced. It grows. It moves to the point that it was part of salvation for everyone. Now, we don't have the opportunity to be part of Christ's genealogy, at least on the front side of it. So we don't have something like that to look forward to. But what role do we play? Because it's there. The way that we'll find that is through Hesed. The way that we'll find that is by going beyond the law. Amen.